Hey everyone! Today, we're diving into the lavish lifestyle of the current president of the Philippines, President Bongbong Marcos, popularly known as BMM. But before we get to that, let's take a quick look back at his father, Ferdinand Marcos, a little history that'll help put everything into perspective. Stick around because you're in for an eye-opening journey into the world of power and luxury. Let's get started. Have you ever watched How to Become a Tyrant on Netflix? It's this crazy docuseries that literally gives you a step-by-step guide on how to take total control as a ruler. It dives deep into the lives of some of the world's most infamous dictators, like Adolf Hitler, Saddam Hussein, Idi Amin, Joseph Stalin, Muammar Gaddafi, and the Kim dynasty of North Korea. Now, the word dictator gets thrown around a lot these days. It's used to describe someone who rules a country with total authority, often in a cruel or oppressive way. But how well do these 6 historical figures fit into that description when we really dig into their legacies? Today, though, we're focusing on a different dictator, Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines. His son won the presidency in 2022, but the Marcos family has a dark history, allegedly siphoning billions from the Filipino people. We're going to dive down this rabbit hole and see just how well Ferdinand Marcos fits into the mold of a tyrant, using the playbook as our guide. The first rule in that playbook is seize power. Ferdinand Emmanuel Marcos, let's just call him Marcos, was born on September 11, 1917, to Josefa Edrelin and Mariano Marcos. His father met a brutal end in 1945 when Filipino guerrillas executed him for collaborating with the Japanese during World War II. His death was gruesome. He was drawn and quartered, an ancient method where a person's limbs are tied to 4 different mules, which are then driven in opposite directions until the person is torn apart. Horrific, right? Marcos, however, seized his own path to power. In 1965, he won the presidential election, becoming the 10th president of an independent Philippines. He wasted no time throwing himself into massive infrastructure projects, even though the country's economy couldn't handle the debt. To fund these projects, he borrowed money left and right, while charming the people of his hometown, Ilocos, in the process. But building bridges and roads wasn't enough. Marcos solidified his grip by expanding the military. He even served as Secretary of Defense, which gave him direct control over the armed forces. And in a clever power move, he upped the military's budget by diverting funds meant for civil projects like schools. Smart, right? Or ruthless, depending on how you see it. Marcos knew he needed the military on his side, so he made sure generals loyal to him either stayed past retirement or got cushy civilian government jobs. This didn't go unnoticed. In 1968, Senator Benigno Aquino Jr., Marcos's fiercest opponent, accused him of trying to create a garrison state. Marcos was up for re-election in 1969, and to win over voters, he launched a massive $50 million infrastructure spree. He poured money into projects left and right, aiming to capture the attention and votes of the Filipino people. But there was a price to pay for this extravagant spending. It triggered a financial crisis in 1970, sparking inflation and social unrest, which, in a way, set the stage for what came next, the declaration of martial law in 1972, just 2 years into his second term. And we can't overlook Imelda Marcos in all of this. If the saying goes, behind every great man is an equally great woman, she might just be the perfect example, but not in the best way. During Marcos's second term, she was accused of bribing delegates to sway votes in their favor during the 1971 Philippine Constitutional Convention. The convention aimed to revise the 1935 Constitution, but was rocked by scandal after the bribery came to light the following year. Yet all investigations were conveniently halted after martial law was declared. It all seems a bit too convenient, doesn't it? The events leading up to martial law almost feel orchestrated. Marcos had a history of using false flag attacks, including the Plaza Miranda bombings and the Manila bombings, one of which occurred just 12 days before martial law was proclaimed. And according to a CIA report, Marcos was allegedly behind at least one of those attacks. But being the sly politician he was, Marcos pinned the blame on communists, taking advantage of the Cold War-era fear of communism, which was strong in the Philippines due to US influence. Now, let's move on to the second step in the playbook: crush your enemies. Marcos did just that, without hesitation. Remember Senator Benigno Aquino Jr., his fiercest opponent? Well, he and others who stood in Marcos's way were silenced, either through imprisonment or assassination. After declaring martial law in September 1972, Marcos rounded up radicals, opposition leaders, and even delegates from the Constitutional Convention who opposed him. Many were jailed, while others fled the country or went into hiding. By 1977, the armed forces had quadrupled in size, and more than 60,000 Filipinos had been arrested for political reasons. The human toll was staggering: over 34,000 tortured and more than 3,000 killed. And through it all, the US was right there, backing Marcos in the name of fighting communism in Southeast Asia. From 1972 to 1983, the United States provided the Marcos regime with $2.5 billion in military and economic aid, along with $5.5 billion from institutions like the World Bank. Marcos had power, and with that, he knew how to play the game, no matter the cost. To make things even darker, a 1979 US Senate report revealed that US officials had known, as early as 1973, that agents from the Philippine government were operating in the US to harass Filipino dissidents. Fast forward to June 1981, and two anti-Marcos labor activists were assassinated outside a Union Hall in Seattle. Shockingly, on at least one occasion, CIA agents blocked FBI investigations into these Philippine agents. The final event that pushed everything over the edge was the assassination of Senator Benigno Aquino Jr. After nearly a decade in prison, Aquino had just been allowed to travel to the US for medical treatment following a heart attack. But upon his return to the Philippines, the unthinkable happened. On August 21, 1983, Aquino was shot in the head at Manila International Airport. Ironically, about 1,000 security personnel were supposedly assigned by the Marcos government to ensure his safe return to his detention cell at Fort Bonifacio. Yet this didn't stop the assassination. Another man, Rolando Galman, was also killed on the tarmac, and the Marcos government quickly and falsely claimed Galman was Aquino's assassin. A Justice Corazon Agrava-led investigation resulted in murder charges against 25 military men and one civilian. However, the so-called trial in December 1985 was a complete farce. The Supreme Court later called it a mock trial, orchestrated by Marcos. But after Marcos was ousted from power, a new investigation in 1990 convicted 16 soldiers, sentencing them to life in prison. Now, let's look at the third step in this dark playbook: reign through terror. Could we ever call Marcos's rule one of love after everything we've just discussed? Of course not. There's even more to his reign of fear. Marcos formed the Civilian Home Defense Force, the forerunner to the notorious Civilian Armed Forces Geographical Unit, to combat communist and Islamic insurgencies. This unit was implicated in numerous human rights abuses, targeting leftists, members of the New People's Army, NPA, Muslim insurgents, and anyone who dared oppose the Marcos regime. In 1971, Marcos took things even further by suspending the writ of habeas corpus, the very law that ensures people can't be imprisoned indefinitely without being charged or brought to trial. Imagine living in fear, with no guarantee of a fair trial and the possibility of being detained for as long as the regime wanted. Now, according to the tyrant's playbook, the fifth step is to create a new society. This means eliminating free speech, the right to assemble, and civil liberties altogether. And as we've seen, Marcos was pretty thorough with that. His civilian home defense force, meant to combat communist and Islamic insurgencies, was notorious for committing human rights violations. He even suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which meant people could be held in custody without a trial, indefinitely. By 1977, reports of these gross human rights violations drew international attention. Newly elected US President Jimmy Carter pressured Marcos to release Ninoy Aquino and hold parliamentary elections to show that normalization had begun after martial law. Of course, Marcos didn't release Aquino, but he did announce parliamentary elections for 1978. And surprise, surprise, Marcos's KBL party won 137 out of 150 seats. Fusion Bisaya, led by Hilario Davide Jr., managed to secure just 13 seats. That's right, only 9% of the seats went to the second-place party. And Ninoy Aquino's Laban party? None of their 21 candidates, including Aquino himself, won a single seat. Election fraud was rampant. There were pre-stuffed ballot boxes, fake voter registrations, flying voters, people registered to vote in multiple precincts, tampered election results, and blatant vote buying. Marcos even denied Aquino the chance to campaign in person, keeping him locked up in prison. Finally, to become a true tyrant, the playbook says you must rule forever. Marcos didn't quite get there, but he held power for 20 years. An impressive stretch in a country where a presidential term is supposed to be just 4 years. He served 3 terms, and between his second and third terms, he declared martial law for 9 long years. Even after martial law was lifted, he retained most of his dictatorial powers until he was finally overthrown by the People Power Revolution. As mentioned earlier, the assassination of Ninoy Aquino was the spark that set fire to Marcos's regime. The outrage over Aquino's death ignited a revolution that saw the people rally around his widow, Corazon Aquino, who eventually became president. Now, let's turn to the legacy of Ferdinand Marcos. His son, Ferdinand Bongbong Romualdez Marcos Jr., or simply Bongbong. Bongbong is now the 17th president of the Philippines. How he got there, considering the notorious history of his father's regime, is anyone's guess. But we'll dive into that and his lavish lifestyle, clearly an inherited trait from his mother, Imelda, who famously owned 3,000 pairs of designer shoes and kept hundreds of untouched designer dresses and coats, tags still attached. While Marcos and Imelda were busy plundering an estimated $10 billion from public funds, ordinary Filipinos suffered through inflation, poverty, and poor living conditions. Bongbong himself was born on September 13, 1957, while his father was the representative for the 2nd District of Ilocos Norte. He started his education at the Institucion Teresiana in Quezon City and La Salle Green Hills in Mandaluyong, where he completed kindergarten and elementary school. In 1970, Bongbong was sent to England, where he attended Worth School, an all-boys Benedictine institution in West Sussex. It was during his time at school abroad that his father declared martial law in 1972. Bongbong later enrolled at Oxford University's St. Edmund Hall to study philosophy, politics, and economics, PPE, in 1975. However, despite his claims of having earned a degree, Bongbong never graduated. He passed his philosophy courses, but failed economics and flunked politics twice. Funny enough, he did well in psychology, perhaps foreshadowing his ability to manipulate minds on his path to the presidency. Just kidding. Or am I? Bongbong Marcos's academic journey is one for the books, but not in the way you might expect. Despite his claims of graduating from Oxford with a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics, PPE, the reality paints a different picture. Failing 2 out of 3 sub-courses made him ineligible for the diploma. Instead, he walked away with a special diploma in social studies, which, fun fact, was mostly given to non-graduates and isn't even offered anymore. There are even reports that Filipino diplomats lobbied to get him that diploma. And yet, Bongbong has continued to falsely claim he holds a degree from Oxford, despite the university itself confirming in 2015 that he never finished. Next up, Wharton's School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Yup, he enrolled in their MBA program. And no, he didn't complete that either. His official reason for dropping out: he says it was to run for vice governor of Ilocos Norte. But let's be real, he just didn't seem to be the finish your degree type. Even his own father, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., wasn't thrilled, writing in his diary in 1972. "Bongbong is our principal worry. He's too carefree and lazy. Ouch." But it wasn't just about slacking off in school. The Marcos family lived a life of extreme luxury, funded by some shady sources. Bongbong's tuition, his $10,000 monthly allowance, and the lavish estate he lived in while at Wharton were paid for using money that could be traced to secret bank accounts under false names in the US, including funds from the Office of the President's intelligence budget. Imagine your entire lifestyle being funded by what many consider stolen money from your own country's people. Bongbong's first taste of power came at 22, when he was elected vice governor of Ilocos Norte, 1980 to 1983, followed by governor from 1983 to 1986. In 1985, his father even made him chairman of the Philippines Communications Satellite Corporation, despite Bongbong barely showing up for work. His salary? It ranged from $9,700 to $97,000 a month. And for what? Basically, doing nothing. And as you'd expect from the Marcoses, Bongbong was also gifted extravagant properties, like mansions in Metro Manila and Baguio, the Philippines' summer capital. Things started to unravel during the 1986 People Power Revolution, which ousted Ferdinand Marcos from power. The Marcos family fled to Hawaii, but not before Bongbong tried to withdraw a casual $200 million from a secret family account in Switzerland. That move backfired when the Swiss government froze their accounts. After Ferdinand Marcos died in 1989, the Marcos family was allowed to return to the Philippines. But Bongbong's lack of remorse was evident. In a documentary called The Kingmaker, he famously said, "I can't come home and coach. I've always flown first class." Yeah, no signs of guilt there. Bongbong wasted no time getting back into politics. After his return in 1991, he ran for and won a seat in the Philippine House of Representatives, representing his family's stronghold in Ilocos Norte. This area had always been loyal to the Marcoses, thanks to the preferential treatment they received during the Marcos dictatorship, even when the rest of the country was suffering under martial law. And it didn't stop there. In 2020, Brittany Kaiser alleged that Bongbong had approached Cambridge Analytica, the controversial data firm, to help rebrand the Marcos family's image on social media. The family, of course, denied it, but the damage was done. Propaganda and social media manipulation have long been tools of the Marcos family, and they weren't about to give them up now. During his time as a representative, Bongbong authored 29 House bills and co-authored 90 more, including efforts to create the Department of Energy and the National Youth Commission. He also allocated funds to support cooperatives for teachers and farmers in his province. By 1994, Bongbong became president of the Kilusang Bagong Lipunan, KBL party, the same party that helped his father win 91% of the seats in the infamous 1978 parliamentary elections during the dictatorship. Coincidence? Probably not. In 1997, Bongbong Marcos tried to negotiate a deal allowing the Marcos family to keep a quarter of the estimated $10 billion the Philippine government had yet to recover from them, in exchange for dropping all civil cases. But the attempt fell through, as the Supreme Court rejected it. The Presidential Commission on Good Governance, PCGG, continues to work on recovering these stolen funds. handling over 100 cases involving embezzlement and human rights violations from Marcos Sr.'s brutal regime. Fast forward to July 27th of that same year, Bongbong found himself in hot water again when Quezon City Regional Trial Court Judge Benedicto Ulep convicted him of tax evasion. For failing to file his income tax returns between 1982 and 1985, during his time as vice governor and governor of Ilocos Norte, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison and slapped with a fine of $2,812 plus back taxes. Though he tried to appeal, his efforts were unsuccessful. Despite his legal woes, Bongbong made a comeback in politics. In 1998, he was re-elected as governor of Ilocos Norte, defeating his father's close friend, Roque Ablan. He held the position for 3 consecutive terms until 2007. Then, in 2007, Bongbong took over the congressional seat that his sister Aimee vacated, running unopposed. He was appointed Deputy Minority Leader in the House of Representatives. In June 2007, he made headlines once again when he filed a motion to intervene in the sequestration of one of the Marcos family's prized properties, often referred to as the crown jewel of their ill-gotten wealth. Valued at around $297 million, Bongbong argued that his father had purchased the property legally. However, the motion was swiftly dismissed by the court, which had already denied a similar request from Imelda Marcos years earlier. Bongbong wasn't one to back down easily. He ran for Senate in 2010, despite being removed from the Kilusang Bagong Lipunan (KBL) National Executive Committee in November 2009. Even so, he remained on the senatorial lineup of the Nacionalista Party (NP) and emerged victorious, taking office on June 30, 2010. In 2011, Bongbong and his mother Imelda were slapped with a $353.6 million fine by the Hawaii District Court for failing to comply with a 1992 court order related to a human rights case. The judgment stemmed from their attempts to dissipate Ferdinand Marcos's estate despite the injunction. By 2014, Bongbong was caught in yet another scandal when he was linked to the infamous pork barrel scam. According to whistleblowers Janet Lim Napoles and Ben-Hur Lui, Bongbong funneled 100 million pesos through fake NGOs connected to Naples. When questioned, he denied any involvement, claiming that the funds were released by the budget department without his knowledge and that his signatures had been forged. Youth organizations later filed plunder charges against him, using evidence from Lui's digital files that exposed the scam. On October 5th, 2015, Bongbong officially announced his candidacy for Vice President of the Philippines in the 2016 elections. But his political career took another hit when, in 2016, he was again accused of plunder for channeling 205 million pesos through questionable NGOs between 2011 and 2013. The NGOs were later found to be fraudulent by the Commission on Audit, COA. The 2016 vice presidential race was a nail-biter. Bongbong lost to Leni Robredo by a razor-thin margin of just 263,473 votes. Despite his defeat, Bongbong protested the results, pointing out that President Rodrigo Duterte had, on multiple occasions, hinted at resigning if Marcos would be his successor instead of Robredo. Undeterred, Bongbong launched his campaign for the presidency on October 5, 2021, through a video on Facebook and YouTube. His certificate of candidacy sparked protests as critics pointed to his previous tax evasion conviction and feared he might revive his father's authoritarian rule. Yet all attempts to challenge his candidacy were dismissed. On November 16, 2021, he announced that his running mate would be Sara Duterte, the daughter of President Rodrigo Duterte. Their alliance, dubbed Uniteam, raised eyebrows as just a few years prior, Duterte had called Bongbong a weak leader and a spoiled child. Yet here they were, aligning for political gain. Clearly, the only thing that lasts in politics is mutual benefit. In a bizarre twist, on November 18, 2021, President Duterte hinted in a televised speech that a candidate in the upcoming election was using cocaine, though he didn't mention names. His remarks were widely believed to be aimed at Bongbong, as Duterte further criticized the unnamed candidate for relying on his father's legacy. Bongbong quickly responded, submitting a negative drug test result from St. Luke's Medical Center and receiving a confirmation from the hospital that the test was legitimate. Despite the controversies, Bongbong won the presidency in a landslide victory on May 25, 2022, securing over 31.6 million votes, more than 16 million votes ahead of his closest rival, Leni Robredo. Many believed he had benefited from the popularity of his running mate, Sara Duterte, and the nostalgia for his father's regime among some voters. For others, though, it was a chilling repeat of history, 36 years after the Marcos family was ousted from power. Bongbong took office on June 30, 2022, and, in an unexpected move, appointed himself Secretary of Agriculture. His tenure in that role was marked by rising food prices, and after a year, he stepped down, appointing Francisco Tiu Laurel, a deep-sea fishing company president and campaign donor, to the position. The controversies didn't end there. In April 2023, leaked documents from the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, PDEA, circulated online, linking Bongbong and actress Maricel Soriano to illegal drugs. During a Senate hearing, former PDEA agent Jonathan Morales declared the documents to be authentic, though PDEA Director General Mauro Virgilio Lazo claimed they were fake. On May 20, 2024, the Philippine Senate Committee on Public Order and Dangerous Drugs turned up the heat on PDEA agent Jonathan Morales, citing him for contempt. Why? Because he was continuously lying. It was Senator Jinggoy Estrada who motioned for this action, with Ronald De La Rosa backing him up. Morales found himself facing detention due to his inconsistent responses about the PDS. Earlier, another key figure, Eric Picoy Santiago, a former National Police Commission officer, was also called out for being a liar. Just a few days later, on May 23rd, both Morales and Santiago were released, as Senate Sergeant-at-Arms Roberto Ancan confirmed. Smells a bit like a cover-up, doesn't it? Now, let's dive into the staggering wealth amassed by the Marcos family. Estimates suggest that during the final years of Ferdinand Marcos's administration, they pocketed anywhere from $5 billion to $13 billion. But hold on, that's just a fraction. Economic expert Jesus Estanislao even speculates the total plunder over the entire 21-year regime could reach a jaw-dropping $30 billion. So, how did the Marcoses rake in this fortune? Allegations point to diverted foreign aid, US military assistance, with generous discretionary funds handed to Marcos as a reward for sending troops to Vietnam, and shady kickbacks from public works contracts spanning 2 decades. The full extent of their wealth remains murky, leaving a considerable chunk untraceable. Let's talk about what some have dubbed Marcos's techniques of plunder, articulated by the insightful Solita Monsod. These techniques include establishing monopolies controlled by loyal cronies, awarding questionable loans from government banks, forcing takeovers of both public and private enterprises for mere pennies, directly raiding the public treasury, using presidential decrees to enrich friends, pocketing kickbacks from businesses, laundering money through shell companies, skimming off foreign aid and international assistance, and hiding wealth in overseas accounts under fake names. The Marcoses didn't stop at local schemes. They made major real estate investments in the US. Imelda's shopping spree included properties in New York, estates in New Jersey for their children, and various holdings in Hawaii. They even owned the California Overseas Bank in Los Angeles. Ricardo Manapat's book, Some Are Smarter Than Others, reveals lesser-known assets like gold and diamond investments in South Africa and properties in Israel, Austria, the UK, and Italy. Back home in the Philippines, there are about 50 Marcos mansions scattered across the archipelago, from Baguio, the summer capital, to Leyte, Imelda's hometown, and all over Metro Manila. Many of these grand residences were sequestered by the government following the 1986 EDSA revolution, which ousted the Marcoses. Now, let's not forget the jaw-dropping jewelry collections. The Malacañang collection includes jewels found in the presidential palace after their flight, while the Rumeliotes collection was seized from Demetriu Rumeliotes, a close associate of Imelda, caught trying to smuggle them out of the country. In February 2016, these collections were valued at a staggering 1 billion pesos, around $18 million, and were set to be auctioned after sitting untouched for 30 years. The Marcoses also had overseas bank accounts, many of which were uncovered thanks to documents left behind in Malacañang. One notable account, opened in 1967 with an initial deposit of $215,000 at Chase Manhattan Bank, included the infamous William Saunders and Jane Ryan accounts at Credit Suisse, named after Ferdinand and Imelda's aliases. The Philippines finally got a chunk of their hidden funds, $683 million, released from Switzerland in 2004. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Bongbong Marcos's troubling attitude toward the victims of human rights violations during his father's regime. In 1999, he infamously claimed, "They don't want an apology, they want money. Even if that were true, shouldn't the victims have the right to demand compensation for their suffering?" Bongbong only agreed to apologize if they'd actually done something wrong. When human rights victims marked the 40th anniversary of martial law in 2012, Bongbong cited various court judgments against the Marcos family as an excuse to avoid an apology, saying, "What more would people want? Maybe just a hint of remorse?" During his 2016 vice presidential campaign, he brushed off criticism of the Marcos regime, suggesting Filipinos should leave history to the professors. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the video. Kindly like and subscribe for more.